It's Thursday. You know what that means. It means Rock and Roll 101 live from the Loudhouse Podcast Network. It's your old pal, Mike McGee, and with me, as always, the lovely and talented Ms. Beth Simmons. Hello, lovely and talented Beth Simmons.
Hey, it looks like I'm doing the show. Oh, there you are. I was worried. I thought I was going to be doing it solo. You're going to be the voice of God today.
I am the voice of God. Sorry, let me rephrase that. I am the voice of God. Since Lemmy is God, so there you go. No, I wanted to make sure I got the looks on before me. You know,
okay.
Got to get the pretty face on first. That's what we're selling. That's what we're selling.
Oh, but there's more to the face for both of us.
There is a big old brain that sometimes works too much behind that pretty face.
Oh gosh, for both of us, I tell you. It is going 24/7. I can't stop it.
It is. The good thing is that our loyal viewership is going to get the best of that because, oh my God, the two of us and, you know, Dino, when he throws his 2 cents in, he's just like, he's the dude with the salt that sprinkles.
Yep. Mm-hmm.
Like we sit there and go, all right, so Beth and I were talking and we decided this, and this. And he just goes, well, how about if we do a little bit of this? And that's it. And then I'm like, yes, that's perfect. So hopefully the old man will be here soon.
Oh, he is driving. He said he's driving and he'll be with us soon. But speaking of salt, that's funny you mentioned that. This week, there's this lady that I saw on, I'm not going to name the platform because they'll make fun of me, but she said that there's a type of salt that you can put near your doorway. And if someone steps over it into your house and they say they feel sick, that means they are not your true friend. And I thought to myself, I need to try this. I don't know where I can find this salt, but I want to try it. And have a big party at my house and see who gets sick.
It's kind of like the old adage of like, if you've just like saged your house and somebody comes in and goes, oh, you're the one I'm trying to get rid of, motherfucker. You know, like if you're having an adverse reaction to it, that means you're part of the problem.
Yep, exactly.
No, but there's tons of like religious based horror films where they do put salt in doorways in front of windows, like to keep the evil spirits out. Like what are the La Llorona or whatever? I don't speak Spanish well, so sorry for butchering the language, but one of the Conjuring series deals with a Latino family that is being haunted. And so like one of the priests putting salt in front of the doors and windows and all this crap. So it's not uncommon. It's pretty, you know.
Well, you know, it's so fascinating too, the whole topic, because so the lady who talked about that also spoke of the fact that we can talk to our deceased ancestors, you know, as you notice your dogs and your cats see things moving around you and you're like, what are they looking at? Is there something over there? But there's nothing there. Well, they're more sensitive to it than we are. But apparently if someone, you know, if you want to know if your deceased ancestor has crossed over, you just say, I'm open to you coming into my dreams, meet me there and tell me what's going on. It was the weirdest thing she said. And I thought to myself, wait, but you could be asking anything to come into your dreams at that point. You're opening the door.
Well, it's funny that you mentioned with dreams. You know, you got to remember, I come from immigrants, and that old world mentality on certain things is very true. Like, you know, there are occasions where, especially like my aunts and a couple of my cousins, they've talked about my dad visiting them in dreams or our grandparents and stuff like that. But one of the funnier ones, it was creepy and awesome all at the same time. Unfortunately, I had a cousin who passed away at the age of 26. He was very young. It was very sudden. But my sister, they were like this. They were they were only like 5 months apart in age. They were thick as thieves and everybody thought they were brother and sister growing up, because they were always in the same grade. They thought they were like twins. Her third daughter would have dreams. My niece would have dreams about the man who would give her candy. And at first, that's the creepiest thing in the world. Until she pointed at the picture and said, that's the man that brings me candy in my dreams. And it was my cousin.
Oh,
and
wow.
after that, my sister, of course, melted into a puddle. Oh my God. But at the same time, it was kind of nice that this is a child that never met him.
Yeah.
Like she has no preconceived notion about it. Whereas it could just be our subconscious in certain aspects.
Yeah.
But for this child, she was only like 3 and he had passed away long before she was born. Mm-hmm. So it was weird and awesome. It was definitely a cool little thing to realize. Yeah. So, but yeah, it's very real, and believe me, like when you alter your perceptions of reality, you tend to catch glimpses of things that you don't normally catch.
Well, I've had a few instances where people would think I was crazy, but I don't know. You want to hear one of my instances? I don't know if I've ever talked about it.
Always.
Okay. So there's been 2, I think I did talk about it, maybe not, but 2 instances in my life where I've seen things that I shouldn't have seen. The first was when I was in Italy and I was living in a very old building. And what had happened was, I was all by myself and I wake up and the light on the porch is on, which I didn't turn on. I knew I didn't turn it on because I didn't go out on the balcony at all. Right. And I look at the windows and at the door, the French doors, and there was a priest looking guy holding his face up against the doors. And I freaked out and I called my friend Ashley. I'm like, I don't know what you're doing at 3 a.m., but I'm going to your house and I'm staying over. And I told her the whole story. And, she's actually a nurse. So she came from a very scientific background about it. She's like, oh, you're probably half asleep. It was probably a dream. She's trying to explain it away. So right. I said, okay, well, we'll see when I go back to my house. If the light is on the balcony, then I know that it was real. I go back and the light is on. Yeah, that was a little scary.
I mean, I'm creeped out by priests and nuns in real life. Just because, I went to Catholic schools for a couple of years. That's enough. That was enough trauma to make religious horror much more real.
I know that feeling. I was born a Catholic and I'll die a Catholic, according to my grandmother. And
right. Yeah. And it's kind of funny because having been baptized Orthodox, it's a little bit different. Eastern Orthodox is different. It's like Catholic heavy. Like it makes Catholic look like Protestant or Episcopalian. Yeah. It's way more hardcore. But at the same time, it's not as creepy. Like the Catholic Church, from all my years of experience, is terrifying.
Well, there's a few odd things. I mean, something that terrified me was going to the Vatican, and it was on Easter Sunday. And I noticed that they had a cardinal and a pope on display in it was a glass case where you could see them and people were praying to them in the Vatican. And I kept telling my friends, I'm like, I got to take photos of this, but I don't want to be disrespectful. So I never did. But I said, I'm going to tell people and no one's going to believe me that they were in these airtight containers where you could view them. But, they've been gone for a while. It wasn't like they just passed. It was a little creepy. It was a little creepy.
I mean, there's all kinds of stuff when it comes to that. That's part of the reason why, as much as I love a good slasher film, because who doesn't? It's silly. There's usually at least one pair of boobies involved and a bunch of hijinks. It's like watching a grown-up version of Scooby-Doo. But for me, the things that truly terrify me in
artifacts, movies, that are left behind, and the reality of things behind the scenes. That
it's the religious horror. Like that's why I love those Conjuring movies. To me, they're the scariest thing that's been put out in the last 20 some odd years. Because to me, like the most terrifying movie of all time is The Exorcist, because I was raised to believe that was a possibility.
Yeah.
If you do bad things or you open yourself up to any kind of, outside entities, you can become possessed.
Yeah.
That's why there ain't no tarot cards or Ouija boards in my house.
Well, that was for the same thing with my mom. She wouldn't let me get a Ouija board, even as an adult. I went on a vacation as an adult with her, and I was joking. I was going to buy a Ouija board, and she's like, no, get that thing away from me. You know?
There's even been a couple of concerts where bands, like some of the heavier hardcore bands, had like one of them had like a logo that was similar to a Ouija board, and I would not buy that t-shirt just because it's just embedded in my head. You know, like you open yourself up to stuff.
And that's true, because even Dave Mustaine from Megadeth admitted that he had played around with dark magic at one point, and he had seen what had happened, and he's like, he stopped touching it after a period of time. Like, it helped him, and then he realized how scary it can be.
Going into the rock and roll side of it, I mean, like, think about all the rumors and innuendo about Led Zeppelin and Jimmy Page with his occult, artifacts, and his obsession with Aleister Crowley and all that stuff.
Well, but that's every musician. Ozzy was, same thing.
Oh yeah. And I mean, and when it comes down to it, it goes back further than that. I mean, it goes back to the old blues musicians with Robert Johnson, and it goes even further back to classical violinist Paganini, who wasn't even allowed to be buried in consecrated ground because he supposedly sold his soul to the devil in return for having his violin tuned.
Well, and it's interesting you mentioned this, because now, granted, we don't discuss Kanye West too much on this platform, but Kanye West, an interview with David Letterman. And have you seen that show on Netflix?
I've watched some of them, but I did not watch the Kanye episode because it's Kanye.
Right after he's showing his church, because he created a church during a period of time, and then it skips to him, and he said, he talks about the bass in songs and the lyrics, and he said, well, the fallen angel, which was, and he refers to, who as being the one who controls the music industry. He said that point blank in his interview. But here's the problem. I mean, it does make sense to an extent, but people don't take him seriously anymore. So they kind of threw it away like, oh, he's just crazy.
And with him, it's hard to take him seriously after all of his antics. But at the same time, like, it's one of those things where, think about all the vices that go with the rock and roll industry, whether it's drugs and alcohol, women and men, and just, whatever deviancy, quote unquote deviancy you may be into, it's all at your disposal. And it is what it is. But at the same time, it's one of those things where, like, it was one of those jokes where, like, oh, you do that, you're going to hell. And I'm like, yeah, well, at least I know the music's going to be good down there, like, it's, I don't get too deep into that, because, everybody's entitled.
It's a scary thought.
I mean, it's more about just, I never really want to disrespect anybody's, belief system inadvertently or deliberately. And so it's one of those things where I'm like, it is what it is. If we won't find out till we get there anyway, none of us are going to find out. Nobody knows until we get there, So, and my mom right now is cringing. Oh my God. Oh my God.
She's repenting for you. Please, God, forgive him. Please forgive him.
I guarantee she does that every night as she's brushing her teeth and saying her prayers in the mirror,
He doesn't know what he says. He doesn't understand it.
And I'm going to try and make a cool segue and go, well, where does that leave, say, something on the likes of, say, I don't know, astral projection?
Oh, yes. Now, this is interesting. So we're going back to 1981, and we have to talk about the Journey Escape album. Now, Journey is known for their album covers, and we love album covers around here. Don't you love album covers?
Yes, I absolutely love album covers. It has been, especially like recently, while I've been doing all the cataloging, one of the things is finding album artwork. And I'll tell you what, Journey, and I know this is going to make a couple of my friends roll over and cringe, but Journey's album artwork was really quite cool.
Yeah. Okay, so as you see this, what are you thinking? Are you thinking Jeff Bezos and his spaceship? What are you thinking?
Well, being that Jeff Bezos was not part of my existence in 1981, no, I just was I was digging the lettering, as you see, the way that they use the 4 and the 3 for in the middle is an A and an E.
Mm-hmm.
Like, I thought that was cool, and it's being creative. Like, I'm the one that goes crazy over old Jimi Hendrix albums and stuff, like Gate Work albums.
So the album cover is all about astral projection, because apparently during that period of time, every member of the band was really into astral projection, being able to meditate and leave their body and enter other rooms. And I guess during that period of time, it was big, like several colleges were studying it. UC Berkeley did a huge study all about astral projection. This was a thing. The government was also doing their own studies into astral projection. And I was talking to my mom about that because I started getting fascinated by it recently, because now it's come up again where people are like, oh, you can leave your body and go into other rooms. And it's so interesting. So I asked my mom, do you think this is possible? I mean, I kind of want to see, because there was actually a video put on YouTube on how to astral project if you want to leave your body. And my mom had she was studying under a professor at UC Berkeley at the time. And there was a girl that did this, and the parents were trying to get her back into her body because she was in a vegetative state. They couldn't seem to get her back in.
Well, and there's the thing. If I have the ability to leave my body,
mm-hmm.
and once I'm on that astral plane,
something else could jump.
Well, do I really want to come back to this world? True. I mean, that's the other thing. Do I really want to come back and live in mediocrity again once I've been able to sail on the astral plane? Like, I think it'd be way more cool to just be out there.
But there's a problem with that though. So you leave your body, it's in a vegetative state. You're now open for someone else or something else to jump into your body during that period of time. So even if let's say during that period of time, you don't get back in fast enough, something else could take it over and then you can't get back in. That was the issue during that period of time, during the studies and research that they were doing, right? But I think the issue is, and from people who've actually experienced it, they've said there's 2 different layers to it. You could be in a good area of astral projection and a bad area. Like, I wouldn't want to be in I think they called it the outer dark area. I can't remember. I wouldn't want to be in that area. But there are some people that believe that if you're in that plane, you are able to get these ideas, like they claim. And I don't know, we would have to interview Elon Musk to ask him. But some of the great thinkers in the world, they claim astral project, and that's how they get their ideas. They're in that plane when they come up with their ideas. I don't know, but we'll have to interview them and ask one day.
I'd be curious as to how that works and how they get to that point. The funny part about it is that when you look at the track listing and you look at the songs that are on this album,
mm-hmm.
other than the title track, I really can't think of any that really make me think about astral projection.
Well, escape obviously, because they're talking about escaping your body. But
because I mean, granted, like this album's got some of the biggest hits that they ever made, and and for example, Kyle, my friend Kyle's favorite song, "Don't Stop Believing," because he turns into like a 21-year-old woo girl at a bar when "Don't Stop Believing" comes on. Yeah. I'm joking. I'm totally breaking his chops. He hates Journey to a point where it's become an obsession with me to constantly post on his Facebook page Journey lyrics, etc., just to drive him bananas.
Yeah.
But like, I honestly love Journey. I think that they're a great band. Like, off this album, I mean, "Don't Stop Believing," it's a great song. Yes, it's extremely overplayed. And yes, the Woo Girls have kind of killed it. But
there's so many other songs that are great. "Stone in Love," like you were going to say.
"Open Arms," "Stone in Love," "Who's Crying Now" is a great one. I mean, for those of us that grew up on Journey's greatest hits, some of the deeper cuts are the ones they're almost like new to me now, because now that I've gone and done the deep dive on some of these, it's kind of neat. But it's a good album. It really is. And it's funny because it was the follow-up to their first, I believe their first live album.
Yeah.
Captured came out the previous January of the same year. And I'm not sure, I know that this was kind of in the midst of the vocalist changes as well, where it became that Steve Perry was the lead singer. Because if I'm not mistaken, didn't they have like a second lead singer at one point in time?
They did.
Days?
They did.
Yeah.
And right now we have Jeffrey Vanderslice who's watching us. And Jeffrey, what do you think? What's your favorite tune from that Journey album? Let's see if he'll respond.
Yeah, and for a second there, I actually paused waiting to hear him respond.
Yes, I like Don't Stop Believing.
Yeah, guys, feel free to comment. We're trying to keep up with all the comments that you guys do. It's a little bit tougher being that I'm having to use my phone currently, so I'm not as good about keeping an eye on it as normal. But yeah, I mean, it's Journey's still one of those bands that people either love them or hate them or love to hate them. So it's kind of funny that's where we are with them, because they really are. They're a great straight up rock and roll band.
They are. But the best way to see a band like Journey or Foreigner is to, I have to admit, it's nice to see them at a pool party like experience. For instance, at the casino in Phoenix, they have this area where you can go swimming while you're watching bands perform. That is just an experience in itself.
That does sound pretty cool.
I don't know if they're doing. I don't know if they've been doing it lately with COVID, but I mean,
I would dig it. That would be kind of cool. Like it's like I still remember the first time I ever got to sit at a bar in a pool at a resort when I was like 23 or 24 years old, and like could afford my first like real vacation, a grown-up vacation.
Oh, that's fun.
And just sitting at a bar while being in a pool was great, until I realized that if I kept drinking Bahama Mamas at the speed that I was drinking them, that I was going to sink like a stone to the bottom of that pool.
It makes sense.
Yeah, you show up at the resort and they hand you a drink and you're like, okay, this is where I live now. All right.
Well, and when it's all inclusive, you got to get your money's worth, right?
Yep. So keeping on, one of the bands that I was dying to be able to talk about, because of, especially once we mentioned the cool ass album covers, is ELO. Because ELO is another band that always had really neat album covers.
Yes.
And their album Time was also released in 1981. And it's just like, it's just a very, see, I can't even go up any higher. It's just very neat that you've got the universe in a puddle. It's just in a puddle. Like, look at how cool that is. There's your Earth. There's the puddle that it's in. That's our universe. Like, just going deep. Like, I love the fact that some of these bands were kind of like living so far outside of the box and had such imaginative ideas.
It just makes you wonder, though, if there was a little extra in the studio when they were creating these ideas.
Well, I mean, it's kind of funny, because one of the catalogs that I finished up the other day was Black Sabbath. And like, when reading about Volume 4, the recording of Volume 4, and the fact that the band used almost as much money for their consumption of chemicals as they did for the actual studio time, and that they actually wrote a song dedicated to cocaine. It's just like, when you think about it, it's hysterical. Like, they wrote the song Snowblind, and it literally says in the song, cocaine.
Yeah.
Just like that. Like, there's no hiding it. There's no disguising it.
And it's like, what is that the point when you realize you have an issue or no? You're like, no, I'm still very creative with it. I'm good.
And I'm trying to bring up the track list here because apparently I clicked the wrong. Let's see. There we go. Let's see if we can get that up. I want to see what the track list is. We tried to be a little bit more prepared for this than normal, but you know, where's the fun in that? It wouldn't be any fun if we didn't have some normal Loudhouse, you know, mishaps. The good news is, and I know I've been saying it for 2 weeks, but the new computer will be had this weekend.
Oh, congratulations.
Yes, I am
That's
stoked.
Exciting.
Yes. So hopefully all this nonsense that I've been dealing with will be gone.
So going back to
soon.
the album itself though, so we had Hold On Tight. Were you a big fan of that song?
I'm trying to bring up the track listing. Hold On Tight was the single off that album, if I'm not mistaken.
Yeah, yeah.
This is one of the ones that I'm not as familiar with. 21st Century Man, I do know. That's kind of cool. But
There's
one of the cool
Twilight too, but keep going.
Well, all I was going to say was, you know, when it came to ELO, they were always. It was funny because they had these great flowing, weird, gnarly ideas, but at the same time, it was almost glam rock dance music.
Yeah.
Like, I mean, just think about some of their biggest hits. You can dance to them. You know, like it's almost as if it was coming off of the tail end of like T-Rex, which is a band that never gets enough credit.
Oh, that's true.
And just like the melodies behind it, it's always got that thumping rhythm with the drums, you know, like don't let me down, like don't bring me down. That's like, it's a great rock song, but you can shake your ass to it easily. And that's one of the things that I loved about them. Now, this album in particular, I'm not as familiar with, you know, as some of the other stuff.
You know, as you say that, I'm thinking, you know, I can bop my head to it. I've never tried to dance to Don't Bring Me Down though.
It's funny because like there's a couple of video music channels on Pluto TV, one of the apps on the Roku. And every once in a while, when I can't find something to watch, I put that on and it always makes Terry laugh. Because it'll be like, I always do 70s, 80s, and 90s. And it's just nostalgia for me, especially the 80s, because it's all stuff that we grew up on with MTV. But when I go to the 70s stuff, the 70s era music video is absolutely priceless. It's just because it's the height of technology for the 1970s. But when we look at it, it's like, what the hell were they thinking?
I don't remember the Don't Bring Me Down music video. Was there fire involved by chance?
There wasn't, but I could see why you would think that, because it's got this orange haze over it, and it's got like the echo picture where it'll just like zoom out, and there's like 75 Jeff Lynnes all, you know, so you just have like a parade of afros behind.
I love that.
And and the clothing is just the bell bottoms and the wide lapels. It's just absolutely priceless. Absolutely priceless. Excuse me. As far as like the old school bands that were still kicking and putting out music in the 1980s, and we're talking about the old guard here. I'm going to bring up The Who. Dances.
Well, and this one's an interesting one because this is the first album they did without Keith Moon, because that was after he had passed away. Within the
Was this the first one?
That's the first one. That's the first one after his death. And before that, because you're thinking, oh, but I thought they were working between 78 and 81. They were, but they were working on their solo projects, because as you remember, Pete Townsend worked on his solo stuff, and so did Roger Daltrey, you know?
Right. And you know, I'm trying to get this thing loaded up as fast as I can. Dino's the one with the new fast, fancy computer, so bear with me, folks. I'm trying to make it move as quick as I can. Face dances, like this era of The Who, is again, it's part of the love-hate of this era, where, you know, some people still love what they were putting out, and other people are just like, no, everything after like Who's Next is garbage. But I'm the crazy one. Like I like, oh, speak of the devil.
Oh,
let me see here.
It looks like we might have a guest. Is it Dino or is it someone else? That's the fun in our podcast.
Yes, you never know. And we may still have another beat come in, hopefully. Depending on whether or not the MTA can get this person home. Hey,
how are we doing?
There he is.
You made it in time to talk about the Who. So we're actually talking about their first album without Keith Moon.
It's Hard, right? What's it called?
No, this would be Face Dances.
Yeah. Face Dances. I don't even remember that.
The 1981. This is the one that's got You Better You Bet on it.
Okay.
That was the hit. That was the single off this album.
I remember that.
Because when you really look at the track listing on this, there's a bunch of stuff that you just kind of go, I don't know none of this stuff. So here, and then, so you've got You Better You Bet. I hate this thing. Don't Let Go the Coat. Cash, The Quiet One, Did You Steal My Money? How Can You Do It Alone? Daily Records, You, and Another Tricky Day. And obviously, the bonus tracks that you get, as they reissued stuff, because nobody's going to buy a 1981 album if there's not new stuff on it. Forget about tradition. But yeah, off this album, like it's You Better You Bet was the hit. It was the big track off this album. And it's still in huge radio airplay to this day.
Yeah, absolutely.
I agree. I agree.
Dina's like, I don't know.
Well, I mean, that was, the Who were kind of, at that point, was this when they did the farewell tour? Was it 81 or was that 83?
It was, no, the farewell tour was 83, but 81 was their first album.
Right. So, I mean, I remember that, the Who was, they were still bankable, like, as far as a concert draw for sure. People still, I mean, you're 20 years into it at this point with the Who from a lot of their fans. So they were a staple as far as, I think Mike just mentioned that they were a staple as far as, an arena rock band, and they had the songs, and, they weren't necessarily doing like, the full Tommies or the Quadrophenia albums, and, but, there were so many songs. It didn't matter. You better you bet. I don't know how many you betters are there in there. I'm not sure. But yeah, I think that's a song that stood the test of time, and it's maybe, like I said, it's not off one of their best albums, but at this point, I think the Who's best albums were behind them.
Yes.
As far as
behind them.
Yeah. So at this point, you were probably getting a couple singles. I think on the next album, you had Eminence Front. You had a couple, but the album itself was like, it wasn't a pillared post as McGee likes to say.
Eminence Front, though. Oh gosh, that's
great
one of my
song.
favorites. Yeah.
I mean, it's killer song, and I think that's where the Who was at that point. There were little sparks of genius here and there, but it was never the full album. You weren't getting 3 singles off the album. You were maybe getting 1 or 2, and then a song like You Better You Bet was going to be a song that stuck around for a while, but the rest of it was forgettable. And that kind of, I mean, the Stones were kind of at that point too. After Tattoo You, it really falls off.
Yeah.
And that was the same year.
Go ahead.
No, I said that was the same year.
Oh, I was just going to say, because, in 1981, the Who put multiple albums, but most of them were also, like they put out a compilation album called Phases. They put out another album called Hooligans, which had different versions of stuff that they had done. Like they had a non-album version of Can't Explain. They had a version of I Can See for Miles that was a little bit different.
They were already starting
like
they were already starting to regurgitate some of their stuff
Yeah.
And repurpose it for other, for different versions and, that kind of thing. So they were kind of ahead of the game.
Best ofs. They were putting out
Right.
best ofs and putting out, compilation albums that had like, okay, here's the popular live songs from that album, and here's, some other stuff. But that's it. It was until they come out with It's Hard. It was, they just kind of threw some stuff out there just to kind of keep them going. And, even like with It's Hard, there's some good stuff on there, but it's not the Who on the level that we know, say, 1975. Right. We're not getting Quadrophenia. We're not getting Who's Next. That band no longer existed. That band was far behind them,
Well, I think, you can't expect that much, from a band. They had a really white hot minute there, or several years, if you want to really, be specific about it. So that kind of output only lasts for so long. And like I said, these songs, like An Eminence Front, like You Better You Bet, they're great songs. And they would have even been great back if they had come out 10 years before that. But there was no, like I said, the cohesive, thing at a certain point is going to break down, especially, you don't have Keith Moon in the band anymore.
So they should have called it a day after Keith Moon left.
No, not necessarily. No. But I just think that there's only so much concentrate that you can have for so long. Some bands have it longer than others, but the first, within 5 albums or so, after that, it's probably going to be a bit of a hodgepodge after that. It's not like you're not going to have hits anymore, but you're just not going to have those cohesive, Well,
epics. And with the Who, I mean, you gotta go back in the history of the Who. Keith Moon and John Entwistle were ready to leave the Who to join Jimmy Page to start Led Zeppelin in 1968. So Here we are 12, 13 years later. They were miserable then. How can you really expect them to still be putting out good music on the level when you can't even stand being in the same room with each other?
Well, but it could go two ways, because sometimes when you have that animosity towards each other, that's when the best material comes out. And that was a thing for Pink Floyd. Well,
you're actually giving me a segue into one of the next bands, which is the Kinks. The Kinks is another great band from the 60s that were still going. And actually by the 1980s, were starting to reinvent themselves for a third time, because, you had their British Invasion era, which is, very much on the same level as, the Beatles and the Stones. They were that first wave of that, early British rock and roll. And then in the 70s, they all did that same thing, where now we're getting into longer songs, more eclectic music, stuff that that just shows we've grown as a band, we've grown as individuals, whatever. We're trying to do something different. And then by the 80s, they started kind of not necessarily going full-blown new wave, but they definitely had a resurgence, like a quickening almost, where they just kind of said, all right, we can start doing some different stuff. And I mean, this has got one of my favorite songs on it. Their album, Give the People What They Want.
Oh, you got to pull the album.
I'm getting there. I'm moving as fast as I can without yelling at Dino that he's got the better computer and he should be doing this.
I'm trying to find it on my list here. So what's the name of the album?
Give the People What They Want. Here, I'll even pull up the Wikipedia for you real quick. I'll put it in the comment in our little chat, if I can find the damn chat. I've got, if you saw my setup right now, you'd understand why I'm going like this, because there's something in the way of everything on my desk right now. I cannot wait to get my new computer. That way I can go to one. There you go. So hopefully that should click a link.
All right.
But this is the album that's got one of my favorite Kinks songs, which is Destroyer. I love it. It also has a great radio hit that I always loved it. Like, Dave Frasina was really good about knowing the right song to play at the right time. And one of the songs that he did when he first started the Rebel radio station was he played Around the Dial. And that's a great, great song, in my opinion. Sorry, there you go. The first one didn't give you the link the way it should have.
Yeah.
Yeah, I made you the host and then I lost my ability to be able to share. Yeah, that's the way it goes.
We'll put up the track list here. So yeah.
So
I thought you weren't a big fan of the radio hits, though.
Well, that's the thing. Around the Dial is not a big radio hit, but it should have been, because it's literally a song about radio, and it's a great song. So it's one of those things where, like, when you did get to hear it, it's really great, but it's not something that you're going to hear in the normal format of classic rock radio, because, you know, they go with their other hits, you know. And the Kinks have always been, in my world, one of the unsung bands of their era, because of the fact that they were lumped in with the Beatles and the Stones and the Who. But without the Kinks, you don't have punk rock. You don't get new wave. Like, it's even
you don't get Van Halen.
Right, you don't. Like, one of the first big hits they ever had was covering the Kinks. Yeah, because we can't go a day without mentioning one of the members of Van Halen. All right,
that's right.
It's
true.
It is. It's very true. But the thing is that, like, you know, even one of the bands that we talked about from this era on one of the previous shows, the Pretenders, Chrissie Hynde and Ray Davies had a relationship. It influenced the way some of the stuff that Chrissie Hynde did, and vice versa. So it makes it kind of cool and interesting when you see that, you know, sometimes it was the younger band that ended up giving the old guard a new trick, you know.
So should we at this point go to the next band, ZZ Top? You ready?
Absolutely.
So ZZ Top released El Loco. You know what that means? Spanish speakers? Any Spanish speakers here? Come on. Everyone knows El Loco. So pretty much they released in 81. And this was the first time that they had recorded an album in separate studios. Usually prior to that, they'd all be in the same room recording together. And so Bill Gibbons said it gave it a different sound and a different feel altogether because of the way they put it together.
Interesting.
Party on the Patio, one of my favorites.
Ooh,
I didn't know that. What was the reasoning behind them working out of different studios? Does it say?
It was just a producer thing. The producer was encouraging it, and it makes sense. They probably felt like isolating each sound was better for, you know, mixing it together.
And I mean, look at that lineup. Tube Snake Boogie, great song. Pearl Necklace, great song. Like, you know, Heaven, Hell, or Houston. That's another one that, like, I didn't even know that song until a couple of years ago. And I was just like, yeah, that's pretty cool. Mm-hmm. So, you know, you get so used to, especially for our era in the 80s, so many of these bands, like their biggest selling albums were their greatest hits, that you just know all the hits. You don't get into the deep tracks until much later. And that's part of the reason why I always ended up loving the deep tracks so much more.
And Pearl Necklace. No one's talking about Pearl Necklace.
Oh, I did. I mentioned Pearl Necklace. I'm trying to be, you noticed I haven't sworn yet today. I haven't cursed. Like, I'm trying to be good, trying to show that I can be polished and professional. But no. Okay. And you know what? It's too bad, because if our guest that was supposed to be on, unfortunately, they're stuck in a talking about tubes. They're stuck in the subway. She would have had a good joke about Pearl Necklace.
Wait a minute. So
or tube sticks
in this subway, they don't have. I mean, the signal's pretty bad in the subway.
Oh yeah, you lose your signal between stations.
It was funny because, you know, she even said, she's like, I got one bar, so I'm not sure if you're even getting this. And I just responded to her, but who knows? So she's got the invite. Who knows? She may pop up, but like I said, being stuck on the subway is not a fun experience, depending on where you are and where you're trying to get to. But yeah, I mean, this is a great album. But now, and actually, we got to mention one more of the classic, and then we can go into what was like the super pop stuff. And I'm going to bring up, because his significant other put out her first solo album at the same year. I'm not sure exactly when the time frame was, because we talked about her album.
I want to guess who you're talking about.
Okay. Come on, bring it on.
So she put out her solo album, and he put out a solo album that you're about to feature.
Yep.
And they were together at the time, and they were in a band together, right?
They were in a band together.
So I'm going to say it's Lindsey Buckingham.
It is indeed the Law and Order album. And I'm trying to make, I was hoping that things were going to move faster while you were killing time, but it's not.
Give me another trivia question. Let's see if I can get it right.
Well, I was going to say, can you name a song off this album? Because I'll be honest, I am not familiar with Lindsey Buckingham solo stuff.
Yeah, me either. Don't care.
So that was it. I mean, that's all I wanted to bring up, was the fact that Lindsey Buckingham put out an album that none of us know about, yet at the same time. And it's funny because Mick Fleetwood and Christine McVie actually played on the album. They actually did. Mick Fleetwood played drums on the song Trouble, and Christine McVie did background vocals of Shadow of the West. So, you know, I always find it funny when an artist goes solo and then still brings in all the, like, half the members of their former band to play on it. Like, what's the point? Just make another album.
Right.
You know?
Well, but I mean, okay, here's a difference, because he's the main person on the album. So he gets the majority of the money. He can just pay them out a little here and there. That's what
I get it. And I mean, and a lot of times, even in that situation, you're not even paying anybody necessarily. You're just kind of mentioning them, you know, saying, hey, thanks. Like, it was just like a buddy showing up.
I don't know.
You know?
I think they always get paid in those situations. Well, maybe, I don't know. Depends on, you know, I'm sure there's a little negotiation there.
Well, I'm trying to figure out how to transition into the next realm, because this is where we start getting into our classic 80s stuff. And let's see here. I'm just going to rattle off some of the albums that we've got left, and you guys just snag one. So we got an Elvis Costello, Squeeze, Jay Giles, The Cars, Loverboy, Hall & Oates, U2, Jay Giles, Freeze Frame. Yes. That's what we'll hit next. It'll be a nice transition, because then we'll go into the Hall & Oates stuff after that, because that is an album that we have to talk about. It's a great album.
If you want me to pull it up, I got it.
Please pull it up.
All right, yeah, give me a second. All right, so we'll look at the track list here. Boom.
I mean, obviously, this is where we really start seeing bands doing music videos, and the music videos off of this album, the two big ones, of course, are Freeze Frame and Centerfold. Mm-hmm. And they were probably, if not the two biggest hits that Jay Giles ever had. Nobody forgets. Yeah. They were two of the three.
But yeah, the thing with Jay Giles is that they were really known as a live band. Like, if you went to go see Jay Giles, like, they were like an experience. They were kind of like going to see Bruce Springsteen before Bruce Springsteen got big. Different type of music, maybe a little bit. Well, they had like the saxophone stuff going on too. So I guess it was kind of that bluesy, you know, rock and roll that was kind of just that bar rock that you kind of, you know, associate maybe in the 80s. There were kind of a lot of those bands and a lot of those artists.
Absolutely. But the cool part about this is that they really dog loving. They really kind of started to mesh well with what was going on in 81, that new wave sound that was coming out of England and starting to get into the States, because there's a lot of keyboards in these songs. There is a lot of, you know, horns, saxophones, and stuff like that. It's not your normal straightforward 70s era classic arena rock.
Right. And then you would see that Peter Wolf would kind of take that mantle up later on, because then he had the solo album. I remember Lights Out. That was
Yep.
that was yeah. So I mean, that's kind of where that sound went. I don't think the band was really necessarily ready to go all the way there. This is probably as far as they could go as far as being that pop.
But I have to say that it's good that they got to this point of this success with Freeze Frame and Centerfold, because I don't know if you remember, but Peter Wolf had just gotten a divorce from Faye Dunaway prior to this album. So this was a good, motivational moment for him to be like, yeah, even though I had a hard divorce, I'm making it through and being successful. So that was something to help him out,
Absolutely.
In your face.
In your face. I made more money without you.
But when you get divorced like that, then you end up having to give it her anyway. So it doesn't
You
really
think so?
matter.
Even though, well, I would hope not, but
well,
if there was spousal support involved,
yeah.
maybe she.
Well, and
you should have failed.
it's one of those things that, like you said, they are a rhythm and blues based band that really, kind of took up the mantle of what was going on in the current music, a lot like the next band that we're going to bring up, which is Hall & Oates. Right. Hall & Oates, they are very much into that Philly R&B sound, that
Blue-eyed soul, baby.
Blue-eyed soul, perfect way to say it. And when Dino can bring it up, it was, their previous stuff was things like Sarah Smile, and you can't, they did the Everly or the Righteous Brothers.
Oh, you lost that love and feeling.
Lost that love and feeling. And so it's one of those things where it's like, okay, you got that soul, that almost Temptation sounding stuff. But then you go into this album, and this is where they start really going into what would become their biggest hits. You got Private Eyes. I Can't Go For That. What else?
Did it in a minute. Did it in a minute. And their follow-up album on this was a juggernaut as well. Yeah. It was even at bigger. One time, I think, maybe it was another album or two after, they were the band with the most, like, either top 10 or number one songs by a band or a duo,
which does not surprise me in the least. And the thing is that their backing band, because it has changed. It's not just like Hall & Oates isn't the same lineup every time, but they've had some amazing artists that have played on their albums. G.E. Smith is one in particular, and G.E. Smith has played with so many amazing artists. Like he did like 2 or 3 David Bowie albums. He was the leader of the Saturday Night Live band in the 80s. Like he's been around the block, and T-Bone Harrison as well. Am I saying the right, T-Bone?
No, it's T-Bone. Yeah, I know who you're talking about. They have, if you watch the live with Daryl, or live from Daryl's house stuff, T-Bone Burnett. Sorry, I always get those two confused. Yeah, but he passed away within the last, within the last 10 years.
A couple years, yeah.
Yeah, but he used to play on the show when they would have when Daryl would invite these, different artists to play, and he would always play. But now when they play they have a picture of him in the background. That's like a awesome velvet painting of him,
That actually, and you know what? That's the kind of shit that I love. I love those nice little tributes to those that have passed, and something that would be goofy that that they would love. Like if I die unexpectedly, I expect both of you to have a friggin' velvet Elvis painting behind you at all times in any picture.
Consider it done.
All right. and I want it in full Elvis pose too,
Yeah.
Right.
and we'll even put the glitches into our show, and we'll
there you go.
We're coming back from the grave.
It'll be a picture of you yelling at your computer.
And that's it. It'll just be a frozen,
So going back to the tour thing, though, weren't they supposed to tour to make up for the tour they missed during the pandemic?
Hall & Oates? Yeah, they're touring right now. They are touring.
Are they?
They are. Yeah, that's a lot of East Coast states. They're not coming back this way, but yeah.
They are, for me, Hall & Oates is a comfy blanket. Yeah. Because I want to make mention of it because she's been on my mind. One of my favorite human beings that ever walked the earth, my babysitter when I was growing up, Terry Croston. She passed away not too long ago. But she was a huge Hall & Oates fan.
And you were a huge fan of her. So you're like, I'll get you tickets and we'll go together.
Oh, I was like, I'm like 6 years old. And the two of us would just sit on the couch in my mom's living room watching the H2O concert on HBO. And it was just like, so for me, like the day that I found out she passed away, I just played Hall & Oates and cried for hours. That was it. But you know, this is a happy memory. I loved her very much. She was like a big sister. And so talking about Hall & Oates, that's for you, Terry.
Well, be careful if you go see Hall & Oates. I have heard that Daryl is, you know, because you can even see it in his TV show. He can't get up there quite as high as he used to. So some people say, because you know, some of that falsetto stuff that he used to do in some of those songs, it's a little grating at this point. But the band is like stellar, and the background vocals are just off the chain. So yeah, definitely. I mean, I would love to. I would risk it to see him, but don't expect 1970s or even 1981. Daryl Hall. That's
irresponsible to even expect that. The guy's in his 60s, and it is what it is. But
if Mick Jagger can do it,
but Mick
Jagger
wasn't doing the things that you know back
Daryl
in the
Hall.
60s that Daryl Hall does. Period. You know, it's easy to stay consistent. For example, Lemmy's never sounded any different.
Right.
Okay.
That's
like
true.
he's for the entirety of his career, he sounded like this. But that's it. It's easy to stay consistent when you already sound like you gargle broken glass. It's not going to get any better or worse. You know. So
but
it'd be fun.
but the songs are there, man. I mean, Sarah's Smile and you know, there's just so many hits that even the 70s stuff is you know, it's just fabulous discography. I mean, don't just judge this album, but you know, there's just a whole bunch of stuff in Hall & Oates. You can go down that rabbit hole and just never come back.
Exactly. They definitely owned their place in the 80s.
And there was nobody else like them too. That there was never like another like Hall & Oates type band that was was all they were one of one. For sure.
And Billboard magazine, I have to throw this out. Billboard magazine named them the most successful duo of the rock era.
I wouldn't be surprised. I wouldn't be surprised. And you know, and it's funny because John Oates is so underrated for his part in it because, you know, you don't see him the same way that you see Daryl Hall. Like Daryl Hall's definitely the face and John Oates is the mustache. So it's like, you know, but he was definitely a very important part of it. And them as a tandem was just awesome. And talking about another guy who had gone through, you know, the 70s and somebody that I have, you know, reignited my love of his music, started taking over the 80s was Rod Stewart.
Oh, yeah.
And this was the year that he put out Tonight I'm Yours.
Okay. Wow. Yeah. That's a great album.
It is. I mean, Rod Stewart, when you look back at that late 70s, early 80s solo part of his career was absolutely stellar. Not to mention, he owned MTV for a while there because he was one of the few artists that always had music videos going all the way back to Hot Legs and Do You Think I'm Sexy and Tonight's the Night. So by the time he got to Tonight I'm Yours, he's already in the upper echelon of MTV ads.
Wasn't he the second video on MTV?
And the third and the fifth and the 12th. And the
he had like
second.
I think in the first few hours, he definitely had of MTV signing on. He definitely had a lot of a lot of videos, because he was one of the
Mhm.
few people, like I said, that was having promotional videos made for, like, they would play them sometimes at movies. I don't know if you remember, like they, as like before the previews even,
Yeah.
they would play those kind of videos there. And so if you were a big enough, but you had to be a big enough act, you had to be like a Kiss or a Rod Stewart or Queen or something like that, where those kind of things would play before him. Yeah. But this album, I remember it distinctly because I would go to my friend's house, and he had an older brother that had like all the cool rock albums, like, he had Cheap Trick, and he had, just Boston and all this stuff. And this was one of the albums that we used to play all the time. Tonight I'm Yours, and
and Young Turks.
Young Turks,
that's like one
those
of
two
my
songs.
favorite Rod Stewart songs of all time.
Yeah,
at
we
least
used to
on
play
his
that
solo
a lot.
stuff. It's a great,
Oh, for sure. Yeah. And then, and he was, and like the Young Turks video and Tonight I'm Yours, those were real big MTV, like I said, they were big MTV hits, and it really kind of cemented him as, kind of up there with like the Stones a little bit. I'm not saying he was the Stones, but he was on that level, like where he was kind of omnipresent. And he was also one of those artists too that could be played on any type of format at that time. He was,
right.
He was kind of dancey, so he was top 40. He was rock still, because he had that gargly, that kind of rough voice, and he had his rock pedigree. So he kind of, checked all and he was a celebrity. He was always getting married to young models, and that whole thing too. So,
I mean, that got more prevalent later, but I get
still,
what you're saying. Yeah.
But people knew who he was. Like, even if you weren't a rock fan or a top 40 fan, you kind of probably knew who Rod Stewart was, just as a celebrity,
Yeah. Well, and Billboard magazine recognized him as the 17th most successful musicians out there when they did a Hot 100 list at one point.
Oh,
wow. And I mean,
nice.
it's one of those things where, like, he's never not been around. Like, he's always been consistent. He put out an album on a regular basis. He was always out on tour. There were always videos. It's the quality of some of it changed and differed based on what you liked.
Like
because by exactly. But that's the evolution of humans. You can't be an angst-ridden 20-something forever. Eventually, you have to modify your music based on who you are at that point in time. It's like Eddie Vedder these days. You can't keep singing about your angst from being a teenager when you're in your 50s. After a while, it's just kind of like, whatever. It was cool when you did it the first time, but now I'm like, I don't care.
And a lot of those songs, that they sang as kids, it just today, and I'm trying to think of the song where he's like picking up a young kid in this
Forever Yours or Forever Young.
Yeah, and it just doesn't make sense, in today's day and age. It's like, it's kind of creepy when you think about the song and the lyrics.
Oh, maybe you're thinking about it. Maybe I'm thinking of something different. I thought you were talking about the one where he's kind of doing from like the father-son perspective of Forever Young.
Oh yeah, no, not that one.
That was
his son.
Heartwarming.
Yeah, that was his son, and yeah, for sure.
But yeah,
and he's not trying to pick up his son in the song.
But I mean, this is also where we start getting some of the more interesting acts that weren't big hits yet, but were going to be one of the biggest bands in the history of rock and roll music. And I'm talking about U2. They put out I believe this is their second album. This is the second album, if I'm not mistaken. They had just put out Boy, which was, in hindsight, was a big hit. It's the one that had like I Will Follow, and let's see, you had I Will Follow, you had Stories for Boys was a hit, and Electric Co were the hits off that one.
Yeah.
No, New Year's Day came later on the album after October, which is War.
Right.
For this album, there's, other than the Gloria single, there's not a lot that people really, connect with in terms of like that immediate, that's it, that's the album that had such and such. unfortunately, like it's one of the most underrated albums they put out because it's one of my favorites. Like I love the track list on this, on this album. Going into, and I just lost it. Okay, so Gloria is the one that opens up, which is their version. Right. It's definitely not the same as the Van Morrison one, but it's loosely based off of it. Like that's the whole point of it. But like I threw a brick through a window, I Fall Down with a Shout is my favorite on this album. I love that song. Right. And Is That All? Which it's funny because you hear some of the similar melodies on the follow-up album. Where you or maybe it was off, I think one of the songs you end up hearing some of the melody on Unforgettable Fire, which was 84. Right. So it's 3 albums later. But it's really interesting because like, it's one of those things where they're like, it's almost as if they kind of went, well, this didn't end up being as big of a hit as we thought it was going to be. So we can get away with recycling some of the music, some of the sound on it. Right. And they did. But the next album that they put out, War, is the one that ends up making them, a big name.
But going back to this album, though, I think the reason why it didn't hit as hard as the next album comes down to the fact that, Bono admitted that he wrote the lyrics while he was in the studio on the mic. He didn't prepare for it at all. And they were under a time crunch and it was costly to keep, the studio. So
and you can hear it. Done. You can hear it. It's definitely one of the more raw albums. Mm-hmm. It's the old adage that we've brought up many times where you have your whole life to write your first album and a year to write the second one. So it's but at the same time, that's kind of what makes it cool. It's kind of what makes it interesting to me is that it does. And if you listen to Bono, if you've ever listened to a Bono live, he riffs. That's part of his thing. Changing lyrics or adding lyrics or, adding a song into a song. Mm-hmm. So,
you two are like the best at like melding their songs together in concert. That they'll do like kind of, it's not so much of a medley as it is they play the full songs, but it transitions really well. Yeah. And sometimes what they'll do is, I know that they didn't do 40 for a long time. That was like the big thing, is because that used to be their closing song, and then they stopped doing it. It was a big deal that they stopped doing it. But then in the early 2000s, they started just putting it in. So they would go from like Bad into 40 into Where the Streets Have, and it was just kind of this whole long, but it was a transition that worked seamlessly, and they were great at that.
And you're right. For a long time, they would do Bad into 40 to close out the show. And it's funny because like Bad is the song that made them the megastars that they became, because that performance at Live Aid when they did Bad became it was the equivalent.
It showed the passion of U2. Yeah, it was
right. It was the 1983-84 equivalent of going viral. It became a single. They put out the EP. They put out an EP that had that track. I think it was Wide Awake in America was the EP that they put out, and that was on. So they did a good job with it in terms of taking that one little experience and turning it into something. Plus, how many bands put out a live album early in their career after only 3 albums that have had moderate success? Mm-hmm. Like they did Under a Blood Red Sky and featured some of the songs from those previous 3 albums. So
I mean that I don't know if that was like a calculated ballsy thing. Like, hey, we're going to do this because they build up this big live following, even though they said they really hadn't broken through yet on radio, and even sales wise they were a modest success, but they were alive. People were talking about them as live. You have to go see U2 because they're bringing it every night.
Mm-hmm. And they were one of those bands that like were doing the club tour, and by the time they got to the end of it, they were so big that they were never going to be able to play a club again outside of maybe like doing a surprise show in Dublin, you know. Very similar to the way the Police were, not as quickly, but it was that thing where on one album they went from being a club band to being an arena band. The Police had that same thing where they went, you know, by the time they went from New York to California, they had become one of the biggest bands in the world. So they're finishing their club tour, going back across the country. And then, you know, they go, okay, now you're an arena band. Like, you just went from playing CBGBs to playing Madison Square Garden in the span of one tour. So that's kind of what U2 did, but unfortunately it was on their third album rather than their first. So now I want to bring up a band just because I know Dino will have a blast with it. Beth will have a blast with it. And it was mentioned by Mr. Kevin Martin of Candlebox when we had our interview with him last week. And that is the band Loverboy and the album Get Lucky. I want to touch on that one, and we've only got two more after that, but I wanted to touch on that one. So go ahead, Dino. You're the Loverboy guy.
Well, yeah. So here's my Loverboy story. I got two of them actually. So, but we'll start in the 80s. So I had a buddy so this is like 5th or 6th grade, and he was really into, I'm sorry, I'm going to mention him again, Van Halen. Okay. I'm like, okay, that was his band. Right. And he was the guy on my block or my neighborhood that had MTV. Like none of us had cable yet. He was the first one. So he had all the videos. He would record them on his Betamax tape, and we would, you know, either watch them live or watch his videotapes of these great videos that were, you know, the early years of MTV. And he had Van Halen, and that was his band. And I was like, man, these guys are good. And so I'm like, well, I need to find my band. So he's got this band. I'm gonna find and Loverboy was the band that was really hot at the time. Like, and they had a great song, "Working for the Weekend," right? Yeah. And I mean, and I guess I had probably heard, this is kind of like when I first started to kind of, you know, kind of get my rock and roll footing. Like I had heard other songs from Loverboy probably on the radio, like "The Kid Is Hot Tonight," which was from the album previous to that. And there were a couple other ones that I had heard on the radio, but this was the one that was cutting through, you know? And, so this was their big breakthrough as far as, you know, with the mainstream. And everybody remembers the video from this album for "Working for the Weekend." Mike Reno, the singer, with the headband and the red like jacket / red pants, and so they were, and it was just like this, them playing on a soundstage. It was nothing fancy at all, but the song just kicked ass, and it's kind of one of those songs that'll never go away. It's a Weekend song. It's going to be on the radio forever. It's one of those songs that could be in a movie, you know, everybody's working for the weekend. So when I made Loverboy my band, of course I had to get this album, got the one before that. And eventually though, I did have to transition back to Van Halen. He didn't go to my school anymore. So the Van Halen thing was open. So I was able to step into that. And that was my thing. But this album, I mean, I remember it fondly. "Working for the Weekend," obviously the big hit. "When It's Over," also another big hit. "Gangs in the Street" was kind of one of those like that one, and "Take Me to the Top" were like the FM radio hit, you know, where it wasn't going to be a mainstream song, but those songs were ones that, like, you know, when, like, I guess 96 Rock or 96.1 was back, you know, was the station back then in Tucson, of course. And they would play those deep album cuts. That was what they did back then, because that's what FM radio did. And they weren't all about the singles every time. And those ones would get played a lot. And those were, I mean, this whole album, I could, you know, it just takes me back. And my other lover, but go ahead. Yeah.
No, I was just gonna say, for me, all I can think of whenever I hear a Loverboy song or somebody mentions Loverboy, all I can think of is, you know, Ellen and Catherine White. Catherine White was a girl that I went to school with. I'm still friends with her to this day, but I just remember her being so excited. We were probably in all of about maybe 2nd grade at the most. and her just being so excited because her big sister Ellen said that she was going to take her to go see Loverboy. And I was just like, really? Oh my God, that's so awesome. It was 1982.
And guess who they opened for their very first show? Any ideas?
Van Halen.
No. Do you know? He
You're
doesn't
muted,
have any,
Dino.
he doesn't have any ideas. He's like,
Sammy Hagar.
No, they opened for Kiss in front of 15,000 Kiss fans, and everyone looked at them a little confused at what they were doing.
Well, they were weird too because they were from Canada, so that was a little different as well. And but Loverboy, if you think about it, and I think we talked to Kevin about it too, they were the template for what Bon Jovi would be because Bruce Fairbairn was their producer, and he's just, you know, he, like I said, this album, it just sounds great. And by the time Fairbairn got with Bon Jovi on Slippery When Wet, I mean, it was like it was like a super team, you know. It was like LeBron and AD getting together on the Lakers. It was just magic. You knew they were going to win a championship. So they had Bon Jovi had a lot of the similar things. They were good songwriters, you know, but then they also had some outside help like a Desmond Child, and then we combined that with Bruce Fairbairn, and that really put them over the top. Loverboy was kind of like the template that they used, and I just don't think Loverboy was as good looking as John and Richie and the other guys, and I think that was, and they were a little more video friendly than Loverboy. Loverboy, they were okay, but they none of them were, you know, you can't compete John Bon Jovi, man. Dude's just got it.
I don't know. With the right makeup artist, I think you could.
Yeah, perhaps. Oh, so here's my second Loverboy story. So a few years ago, I'm working at a hotel, and I guess it must have been a KLPX show. I'm assuming it was. Loverboy was playing somewhere here within the last 5 or 6 years, whatever. And I didn't know this, but the bands were staying at the hotel that I was at, and a white van pulls up, and I open the door, and Mike Reno jumps out. And well, first I didn't realize it, but then I was like, so they had said some artist was coming by, but they had, you know, the people there, they didn't know who Loverboy was. They're all, you know, 20 years old. They don't know who the fuck Loverboy is. And he gets out, and then I'm like, oh, that's Mike Reno. And he walks in the door, and then he's like, he sees someone he knows, like a manager or something like that. He's like, nice place. And I'm still kind of like standing next to him. And I just kick myself for not saying this. I go, it's not a bad place if you're just working for the weekend.
You should have said it. No. Oh, God.
I missed it. I was like, oh, it was right there. It was so right there. But no.
And that song, it's funny because like I remember like the radio stations that I would listen to when I was, you know, in like 6th or 7th grade, and that 5 o'clock time would hit on Friday, and it would play the Huey Lewis song. I can't remember which one it was, and then Working for the Weekend, and then Todd Rundgren's I Don't Want to Work. Like
Bang the Drum,
those were the 3 songs. Yeah, banging the drum. Like they do those 3 songs back to back to back in the first 15 minutes of the 5 o'clock hour, as everybody's getting out of work. Like, here you go, party weekend. Woo-hoo.
Yeah.
It was totally gimmick, and it was funny, but like, you know, but looking back on it 30 plus years later, it's still something I remember, you know, like when I hear those songs, that's immediately what I associate with it is 5 o'clock on Friday. And now that's driving me bananas that I can't think of the Huey Lewis song, because it was one of their first big hits.
It's funny because Huey Lewis had a lot of good, like again, like bar band rock songs in their first couple, before sports became like kind of put them over the edge and made them huge top 40 hits. They had like these songs. Yeah, they're all about like, you know, working for the man and getting off and, you know, getting with your girl or whatever. All those songs were like that. Was it God, I'm trying to think of the song now. You know, it's killing me. not Take the Job and Shove It, but something like that.
The Huey Lewis song. I'm trying to find it. Like I'm trying to bring it up. It's all about finding what folder it's in. But it was their first big hit, and then they proceeded to come out with, I believe, 4 and Sports, where it made. I don't remember which order it was in, but those were the next 2 albums, which were juggernauts. They were just like hit machines. Like Huey Lewis and the News pretty much hit the same stride at the same time as Hall and Oates,
right?
And we're on that same level as that. It's poppy. It's got that little touch of new wave, but it's still just straight ahead rock and roll.
Working for a living.
That's what it is.
Yeah.
Working for
taking
a
what
living,
they're given.
Yeah. And I'm working. I'm taking what they're giving because I'm working for a living. And that was it. It's so like those 3 songs back to back were the finish.
Maybe throw in BTO, Taking Care of Business.
Right.
That's another one that they used to do all the time.
And that was on like the college radio station. That's the funny part. That was on Z89 in Syracuse, is the college radio station. So let's finish up with our last 2. I'm gonna say, well, let's just touch on Elvis, because it's definitely not one of his more popular albums, but it's where you see the transition of Elvis Costello evolving, because I believe that this was an album that he did without the attractions. And I'm talking about Trust. The stuff that we all know and love about Elvis Costello comes a little bit earlier with My Aim Is True, This Year's Model, and Armed Forces. Those
Veronica.
Are the songs.
Yeah.
Well, Veronica comes later.
Okay,
but like all the big hits like Radio, Pump It Up, Allison, all those songs came in that late 70s era where he was doing that punky new wave stuff with the attractions. That's when he was on Saturday Night Live and, doing the crazy stuff, and, just the pinnacle of what we look at and think about when we think about Elvis Costello. But this, me personally, I don't think that Elvis Costello's ever put out a bad record. It's just about whether or not you're into it. Like musically, he's always been on point. And he's one of the guys that it's amazing who he can play with, because in later years, he's worked with Burt Bacharach. He's done he's run the gamut of the performances that he does, where one minute he can be full on, white shoes, punk rock Elvis Costello, and then he lets his beard grow and he's playing an acoustic guitar again. So, we're not going to kill too much more time on this album.
My whole thing with Elvis is that, that he wasn't my cup of tea, but he was a craftsman as far as, and people really gravitated toward that, whether or not you like the music. He always had, like I said, he always had a good song. They weren't necessarily bad songs or whatever, but if it wasn't your cup of tea, it wasn't your cup of tea. But he played well, he had energy. It was, and like I said, he was kind of a new wave hipster darling, I guess, if they didn't have hipsters back then, but that was kind of what it was. If you were in the know, it was like Elvis Costello, Talking Heads, those kind of people like that kind of stuff, and that was the David Byrne type, think rock, I guess, would probably be the.
And it's kind of funny that you mentioned like the hipster thing, because he did have that look long before anybody ever used the term. He had the horn rimmed glasses, and then like the pin thin tie and the suit jacket and the white shoes. Right. Like it was a look that nobody else was really doing at the time, except for maybe someone like the next band, which is the Cars.
Well, before we go to the Cars, I have to mention something about Elvis Costello that I thought was interesting. His friends and his family, they really wanted him to try out liking Jefferson Airplane and possibly get into the Grateful Dead, because they thought, oh, maybe we can make you a Deadhead, And, he gave it a shot. He listened to the albums, and then he returned them for Marvin Gaye albums.
Yeah.
Sad.
Good choice.
when it comes down to it, like, if you look at his career in the retrospective, he's done amazing work. Like, to be able to put out the amount of hits that he's put out, to be able to have the diversity that he's had, that's pretty impressive. And to still be relevant, 40 some odd years later, where when he puts out new music, people are still interested. Like, I'm still angry that I missed getting to see him at the Rialto a couple of years ago, because I would have cut off an arm to get a ticket for that. Unfortunately, I didn't have my in with Rialto Ross back then. Because then I would have been like, can I just let me stand? I'll bartend. I don't care. Just let me get into the show so I can see it. Like, I wouldn't have cared. I just wanted to be in that
show
room.
wasn't that much. I thought it was like a $50 show, right?
It wasn't about, it was just the fact that I didn't, like, I had had so much luck with being able to just show up and buy a ticket at the Rialto, that the one time that I wasn't able to, it was on the show that I probably wanted to see the most. And so, and it's an older audience. So you're not going to have, they put out the chairs. Like, that's rare at the Rialto. So there's only a certain number of people that can get in, as opposed to when we go see one of the more, recent shows, like, for example, Candlebox coming up, or the Psychedelic Furs coming up. Those are easy ones that it's standing room only. You can.
Well, you'd be surprised though at some of those shows now you go to. They put out like the half seat thing on the floor. It's it's a little sad, but I'm like,
that's when you're getting older.
Exactly.
When your band's getting older.
Yep. Well, you look at those people and you're like, oh man, come on.
It's kind of funny, because when we did the last show that we did go to at the Rialto, we brought the kid with us, Dino and I, and my 13-year-old, and he just kind of looked at me and was like, people really sit at rock concerts, Dad? And I'm like, only the old people. If you have to sit down at a rock concert, you probably shouldn't be going to rock concerts anymore.
Well, Yes did a show at the Rialto, and that was a fully seated show. Like, if you got up, you couldn't get up without people looking at you weird. I wanted to get up and dance, but
there's a certain, now that we're moving into this, we're all getting into that age, and now they're I've been to shows where, like, there's no one at the show, and it's a seated show. Like, there's not very many people. It's easy to move, but someone will still tap you on the shoulder and be like, "Hey,
back to your seat.
Go to you. Can you tone it down a little bit?" I'm like, there's like 5 empty seats to the right of you. Just move over. We're jamming out here. We're having a good time.
Well,
so
it's that reminds me of of the first concert that my mother and I ever went to together. I took her to see the Beach Boys for their 50th anniversary show, and it was her birthday present. And at one point, we're just kind of sitting there, and like, there's a couple sitting next to her on one side, and the guy's got a cane between his legs, and there's another couple on the other side, and you can see the lady's just kind of like holding her back. She's uncomfortable in the plastic seat, and my mom goes, I want to get up and dance. I want to shake my 2 brand new hips. And I'm like, go for it, Mom. Like, fuck these assholes. If they don't want to get up, then screw them. Sorry, I dropped an F-bomb there. That it was inevitable.
You tried.
Finally, we just kind of looked and said, can you excuse us for a second? And we walked past, and my mom just went to the back aisle and just danced her ass off and had a blast, until I finally said, come on, Ma, I'm going to steal you box seats. And we stole box seats at Saratoga, and that was it. And she could dance all she wanted. She had a blast. But she was like 66 at the time, and she's like, I want to dance. I want to shake my hips to these songs. I want to have fun. I'm like, go ahead, pretend you're 16 again, have fun. And that made me happy, like seeing my mom regress to being 16 and wanting to dance, do you want to dance while the band is actually playing that song? That's great. So
but yeah, right. So watch out when you go to the Rialto. Someone might, tap you on the shoulder.
No.
Yeah.
Or break a hip.
They might break a hip. All right, we got one last album. It's a great one. It's the Cars, Shake It Up. I love the Cars. I think that they are one of the loved but not loved enough bands of their era. And this is a great album. Great album. Since You're Gone, one of my favorite car songs.
Doesn't get enough play.
Not nearly enough, because Shake It Up's always the one that gets played.
Right.
It's the upbeat
Drive.
Yeah. It's, this is, especially once you get into the later 80s stuff, it's definitely, but like Since You're Gone, I think it's a great, great song. It is a perfect song, in my opinion. And I'm trying to think, was Candy O the follow-up on this? Because Candy O is the the one that everybody absolutely loves. That's the big one. But I think Candy O is the follow-up. But this album, it's an underrated album. It's definitely an underrated album. Let's see.
78 and then 81.
And Rick Ocasek,
these aren't in order.
Rick is such a talented musician. Well, was a talented musician when he was still with us, but because when he went solo, he did every instrument
Candy
on
O's
his
before.
He did every instrument on his solo album. And then the other thing that was interesting about him, did you know he produced 3 albums for Weezer?
Yes.
Yeah.
That's just like, it blows my mind.
Well, the part that that always kind of like gets me riled up about the Cars is that's all that most people associate with them is the Rick Ocasek part. I mean, for me, I'm trying to remember the bass player's
Benjamin
name.
Orr.
Ben Orr, yeah. I think he's a far, far better singer, and the songs that he sings lead on are the best songs that the Cars did. Granted, again, that's a personal opinion. It's my particular, opinion on that thing. But I mean, they're a stellar band. Mm-hmm. They are a stellar band that kind of it's tough in this era, because there were so many big name bands from the past, and then so many brand new bands that were making waves, that some of the bands in the middle kind of get lost in the shuffle. And the Cars always felt to be one of those bands that they were always there, they were always noticed, but they still kind of get lost in the shuffle, because at the same time that this album's out, you've got the Stones putting out Tattoo You, you've got the Kinks putting out an album, you got the Who putting out an album, and then you've got the newer acts putting out an album. So it's tough, but
they didn't have the longevity. I mean, they had the songs, they definitely had the songs, but there was nothing after, like, Heartbeat City and Door to Door. That was kind of it. There was never any more after that. So they didn't have that kind of, and by the time the 90s came, they had disbanded. So, and then Benjamin Orr, there was a little bit, I think there was probably some tension there too, because he had the big hit. He had Who's Gonna Drive You Home, right? Yeah. But yet Rick Ocasek's girlfriend is like the main thing in the video. So it was kind of a weird. They were also one of these bands too. They weren't necessarily the best looking guy. They went the quirky route with the videos too. Like, all their videos were fun and a great time, but like, no one like went, "Ooh, Rick Ocasek." Oh yeah, no one had a Rick Ocasek, poster in their room.
What? He was a good-looking guy. Come on.
No, he really wasn't. But the thing is that like Benjamin wasn't a bad-looking guy. Like if like when you see live concert footage of him, and they're just doing the dead straight shot of him singing. Yeah. He was a blonde hair, good build. Like he was a good looking dude.
I just don't think that not that they didn't sound good live. I just don't think that they were like an exciting live band. You know what I'm saying? Like people, they
weren't jumping around. They weren't doing the big crazy guitar and drum solos the way that some of their contemporaries were.
But Rick obviously was good looking enough to land himself a supermodel. So
sometimes it's not about the looks. Sometimes it's about the personality.
It is a personality for sure. And his skill and his talent.
And the wallet.
No,
that doesn't hurt either.
No, but, not the wallet.
But he and Paulina Porskova were together until he died. So you know,
Well, they were kind of estranged toward the end. That
were
was,
they?
yeah,
Oh,
they
okay.
were.
Yeah.
And because they didn't live together, and she's the one that found him, right? Because he had died in it. Yeah. And they had gone through, like, I guess, a really bad stretch there, and people weren't talking to each other, and the kids and all that kind of stuff. So
Well, but
it was
they
kind of a
still
sad little story.
They still kind of survived the better part of 25 years.
Oh
which
yeah,
is,
it was amazing that they made it that far.
for rock stars and supermodels, that's like a lifetime and a half. Like
sure.
that's a long time. So, but yeah, so there we are. We've wrapped up 1981, and
finally.
I mean, talk about a juggernaut full of material. I just hope that everybody enjoyed it as much as I did, because I truly loved it. When I get to be able to talk about multiple things all in one show, it's great.
Well, next week, I think we need to pull apart the lyrics. What do you guys think?
We could do something interesting like that. We've got some interesting stuff that we've got in the pike, including the possibility of modifying how we do our show every week. It might be interesting. So that's the conversation that, if Dino didn't have a grown-up job, we would have already had this conversation. So
this is all news to me. So I'm glad to hear it.
It will be interesting. So come back tomorrow for happy hour. We've got some
Maybe.
Interesting news stories in the in the pike. I'm sure Beth will have her best foot forward on that.
Yes.
And
for sure.
Thank you. All right, Dino, you're in charge here now, buddy.
I am. I'm totally in charge. I'm all the way in charge. I'm large and in charge. And we all know what you're saying. How can you miss us if we never go away? Goodbye.
See ya.